Hey guys, go ahead and grab a beverage. I'm having a F's, Turkish friends. How do you say that? But yeah, we're in Turkey, and I figured I'd do a tire review. It's high time because we're on the second set of the tire I'm going to review in the last 2.5, 3 years. So if this set of tires looks a bit new to be doing a review of, that's because these are the new set. This set we've driven some of the UK, basically from London across Europe through the Balkans and then across Turkey to Georgia. And now we're kind of in the south central part of Turkey in Cappadocia. So they have quite a few miles on them too, and quite a bit of dirt. We've run a lot of the Trans-Europe Trail. The previous set of Toyo 255, 85, 16 open country mud terrains. We did some mapping work for the government up in the Pacific Northwest, sort of soil, Oregon area. And then we headed up to Alaska, did a loop. Then down to Baja, Arizona, back to Baja for another Baja race. And then we drove the truck to Texas and shipped the truck to Germany. Did some Europe, not much off-road there. A loop of the UK, again, we did some green laning, but not a lot off-road there. And that tire was close enough to being worn out that we didn't want to head off into the east without a new set of tires. So we replaced them a bit early. So that's the experience we have with these tires. My experience is since 2018, my wife and I have been traveling in our truck. We've done Pan American Highway, not really on the highway so much, but a lot of exploring in Central and South America. And then of course up to the tip of Alaska. And now we've gone through the Balkans and over into Turkey. And on this section, I'd say the Balkans and Turkey, we've done a lot more off-road because of the Trans-Euro Trail and stuff and other spots like that. Before that, I've been instructing for like Overland Expo, events like that since it started. Also instruct special operations, military as well, and the same sort of basic stuff, off-roading, winching, tire repair, vehicle repair, that sort of thing for, I don't know, let's say 13, 14 years, something like that. And then background before that was all desert racing, working for suspension companies, etc. So that's my background in off-road, and here's my opinion on these tires. The Toyo tires in general, I do have a high opinion of. I wouldn't say I'm biased towards them. We're not sponsored. The first set we did get at a discount just because we reached out to them and asked them if we could have a little discount. Didn't get them free or anything, and there was no obligation for us to do this review or any review. And then when it came time to get new tires, we were in the United Kingdom, and I considered 3 or 4 different options, and due to price and because we had such a good experience with the last set of Toyos, I went with them again. I've used Toyos in the past, but that was a good 12 or 13 years ago. So I wouldn't say that really pertains to my opinion of these now, but that's our background. I've used almost every brand of tire out there over the years, whether it was racing or overlanding, etc. So my opinion of Toyos is that they're really well built. They're a heavy tire though, but they're really well built. I have a lot less fear of getting flats than I would with a lighter duty and lighter construction tire. With that, of course, you get the penalty of weight. I can tell the difference. When we put on that set of Toyos, we were coming from a Cooper ST Max, if I remember correctly. Here's the video for that tire review. It was a great tire. It was a lighter duty tire, I felt. It was way better in the sand because it was less aggressive than the Toyos. But check out that tire review. When we went to the Toyos, immediately it was like we had changed the gearing slightly. Not a full gearing change, but you know, you could tell climbing mountains on pavement, trying to do highway speeds with this old diesel and the big box on the back. It was not quite a gear difference, but it was, you couldn't quite hang that gear as long as you could before. So it's a significant difference. Sorry, windy day here. When we brake, when we get going, you can feel the difference. And they're the same size tire, at least in name. The other thing with Toyos, I've always noticed that they're accurately sized or even oversized. So you'll notice they have a huge amount of tread depth new, which I do really like because I feel like they last quite a long time for a fairly aggressive mud terrain. I don't want to say super aggressive mud terrain. The super swampers and mud bog tires are in a sort of different classification, but for the highway going daily driver mud terrains, they're pretty aggressive and they have a really deep tread depth, at least new. And that's nice because you're going to get a long life out of them. The rubber compound on these, I would say, is pretty extraordinary. Every tire I've ever had has some chunking over time, right? Overlanding, especially with a heavy truck, we do a ton of gravel roads. and driving at full speed, fully loaded on gravel roads chunks tires because there's little sharp rocks. And of course, whether rubber or a rock is going to give, well, it's going to be the rubber. And every tire I've had is chunked a little. I've had ones really badly chunk, and I would never recommend those specific tires to anyone. But over time, every tire company has gotten better at finding the compound that doesn't chunk so much. These have been extraordinary. Those haul roads up in Alaska, we were doing 50, 60 miles an hour for hours and hours and hours on them. And there's just nothing. There's not a chunk taken out of them, and that blows my mind. When we bought these tires, they were actually had a construction date the same as the other set of tires. So these are 2 years old roughly, right when we bought them, which is not what I'd like to do. You want to try and buy sort of fresh tires or new tires because that rubber is aging over time and usually it dries out and it gets more brittle and it chunks more. But as you can see from these tires, and I'll show you guys some close-ups here, there's almost no chunking. And we are a heavy truck. When we have 65 gallons of diesel in this thing, that's a lot of weight over the rear tires. And again, the rubber compound is fantastic. It really holds up. On the not so likable side of these tires, I would say it's sort of an old tread design. Most of the highway going mud terrains, as I'll call them, that tire that's supposed to look aggressive, do okay in mud, but it's not dedicated to like living in a swamp or in Central America in the jungle. That's kind of a different classification of tire. You don't care if those are loud, you need them to work like a tractor in the mud. But of the highway going mud terrains, it's now kind of on the more aggressive side. It's as aggressive as like the really old BF Goodrich KM1s, basically the original mud terrains. Those going through a parking lot or highway speed would hum like crazy. These aren't that loud. They're much quieter than that sort of first gen of mud terrain tires that I experienced back in the 90s, but they're definitely louder than the newest generation from, let's say, Cooper, BF Goodrich, and some of the others. These are definitely louder than those. So they're kind of almost an old school tread design now. And I'm not saying that's bad, it's just for overlanding, it's probably not the best tire. In sand, we notice we immediately bog much more than we do with, let's say, an all-terrain tire, or even most recently, those Coopers we had on the truck. Those are definitely better in sand. They don't dig down, they don't have those giant tread voids. And so it's, you know, it's meant to dig, right? It is a mud terrain tire. It's meant to move material and then clear material. And that's not what you want in the sand. You want to sort of like a snowshoe, stay on top of that surface, right, of the snow. And if you have a super aggressive tire with giant gaps between each lug, it's going to want to dig. And so these tires do exactly what they were designed to do, which just happens to be not what I want them to do in sand. But I knew that, of course, you should buy a different tire if you're looking for a great sand tire. I just wanted to mention that because I do feel like some of the mud terrains out there these days have gotten so mild in their tread pattern that they're actually pretty good in sand. It's not the negative that the more old school mud terrains had in sand. I just would say these definitely is not their shining point. If you're going to do a lot of sand, there are better tires. Again, we've had no problems because we just air down further. The other reason we're airing down further is they're a super stiff tire. So if I would go to, let's just say, my standard on this particular truck might be, let's say 25 in the rear, 20 in the front, just because we're heavier in the rear bias with the auxiliary tank and the water tank and everything. So if we're fully loaded, I'll kind of offset it 10 PSI or 5 PSI between the front and the rear, depending. And now with these tires, I'll go down to, let's say, maybe 20 in front and then 17, 16 in the rear. So not quite as much of a differential as you get lower and lower. But I will go lower with this tire than I did with any other 255, 85, 16 I've ever had because they're so stiff. Again, that means, not necessarily doesn't mean that they're tough, but it is because they're really tough. I do believe this carcass is one of the toughest tires you can get, but you're paying for it in weight and you're paying for it in needing to air down further. And when you do air down to, let's say, a comparable PSI, 25 PSI with an all-terrain or with some other brand tire, it's going to be a lot cushier of a ride than 25 PSI with this exact tire. So 1-to-1, you know, comparing apples to apples, it's a stiffer, rougher riding tire. Tread life has been really good, surprisingly, for mud terrain, especially with massive voids between each lug. It's been really, really good. Better than I expected it to be, at least. It's not going to be as long-lived as an all-terrain, but I've been really impressed. And considering that when we're fully loaded, we're not that light of a truck. We're probably you know, 6,500 to 7,000 pounds, which is light, I know, compared to, you know, let's say a Super Duty or a E-Series van or some of the bigger rigs for overlanding. But for a Land Cruiser, 6,500, 7,000 pounds is fairly heavy. So considering our weight, we're definitely impressed with how long the tread has lasted. I would just say, I think the tire is in need or due for an update on the tread pattern. And I wouldn't mind it if they went to a little more mild mud terrain setup. Or if they wanted to keep these as their serious mud terrain, maybe they could update the Toyo M55. If you don't know the M is in Mary 55. I don't think I saw it for sale anywhere in Europe. So I know we get it in the US. The Bureau of Land Management uses them on their trucks a lot, not necessarily exclusively, but it's a super tough tire. It may have the same carcass as these mud terrains, I'm not sure, but it's also a very stiff tire, but it's more of a mild all-terrain pattern. The problem is it's such an old school all-terrain pattern that Toyo even states it's louder than the mud terrains. So here you have a mud terrain with huge tread depth, big gaps between each void, and it's quieter than the more mild looking Toyo M55. So whatever they do, I would just like it if they took the aggressive carcass of these that's super heavy duty, super trustworthy, and maybe did a tread pattern design that was sort of in between the two. Not as aggressive as the mud terrain, a little more aggressive, but somehow quieter, because I think with computer designing of treads these days, they're able to make them a little bit quieter. But one other thing I noticed with Toyos over the years, cost. Sometimes they are immensely more expensive than some of the other brands. I don't know if it's warranted or not. They're a really good tire, but if they're $100 per tire more than another one, I can't say that it's that much better, right? So I don't know if it's worth it. Over in Europe where we bought these tires were comparable, if not less. So something with import tariffs or who knows what makes these not nearly as overpriced as they are sometimes in the US. I'm not saying exclusively, but these are the exact same or cheaper than a comparable off-road tire. I think you're getting one of the top tier best tires out there, as long as you're good with this tread pattern. So that sort of sums up my view of these tires. I completely trust them. I'm not driving as carefully as I would off-road with a lighter duty tire. I don't love that they weigh a ton. I'd like a lighter tire, but I know I've got something I can trust as we head, you know, right now we're in Turkey and we've spent the last couple weeks in pretty much the middle of nowhere with no one around to help us. And I have a lot of faith in these tires. If we move on to the Middle East or Africa overlanding, I'm definitely going to move to a different tread pattern just because these aren't the greatest in sand. So I think that sort of summarizes what I think of these tires. They're a really good tire. If you can get them for a good price, I would have absolute confidence in using them. But I do think they're due for an upgrade or a redo of their tread pattern to make it a little bit quieter, a little bit longer lasting, and maybe a little more all around. So I would just love it if Toyo came out with this exact carcass with an all-terrain tread pattern that's nice and quiet, but just as long lasting and resistant to chunking. So thanks for coming along for Tim Talks Tires, or whatever the hell we're calling this. And we'll see you next time. See ya.